Welcome back, everybody, to more from the Sableyes. I'm here today with Jordan. How are we doing, Jordan?
Not too bad, thank you.
That's good. And today we're going to be looking at the deck that you and I both played at World Championships. It's Giratina Malamar, the tag version, as opposed to Ultra Necrozma or Tina Chomp. This deck's pretty strong, but maybe it's not the most consistent thing going around.
Yeah, it's not quite as consistent as I'd say like the deck that Henry played, for example, but it still is one of the most consistent decks in the format, all things considered. It's probably, I'd say, like the third most consistent deck, behind like Pikarom and Mewtwo. And it's just so powerful. It's one of those decks that it feels like as long as you draw well, you've got an advantage in almost every single matchup.
And I think that's the key here, is that if you do draw well, this deck can beat pretty much anything. We'll start off with the Pokemon line as usual. Very simple. With Giratina Malamar, you're going to be playing 4/4 Malamar with Psychic Recharge. Nothing much more to really say about that. And we also have our 2 Giratina with Shadow Impact to put on consistent damage pressure, as well as being able to use Distortion Door to recycle your attackers. The good thing that this deck is able to do, as opposed to things like Ultra Necrozma or Tina Tags, is it's able to... Oh, sorry, not Tina Tags, Tina Chomp, is it's able to really make the most of that Distortion Door ability by putting spell tags onto Giratina as well. So you're able to really threaten a lot of damage with one basic non-GX Pokemon.
Yeah, it's so strong. This 4/4 Malamar line and 2 Giratina is like a staple tank card that you're going to be playing in every single Malamar deck, guaranteed. Giratina is just the best non-GX attacker in the game, and debatably the best attacker in the game, just because of how efficient it is. If you've got Malamar in play, doing 130 damage plus more from Distortion Doors and Spell Tags is insane amount of damage to be dealing with a non-GX. If you can power this up every turn, which isn't that hard to do, you're going to be in a pretty good position to win the game.
You certainly will, and like we said, if you're able to continue to chain these over and over, if your opponent cannot respond, you're likely to come out on top. The rest of the Pokemon line is either in support of those 10 Pokemon or to kind of give ourselves some extra ways to take prizes. We obviously have 4 copies of Jirachi with Stellar Wish to help ourselves set up. This is probably the best starter in the deck. Well, not probably, it definitely is. It's the one that we want to start with, which is why we've got 4. Some lists that we were testing before Worlds had maybe 3 Jirachi. I even saw a couple of lists going around that only had 2. But because you want to make sure that you've got this in the active, 4 is a pretty solid count.
Well, we were just saying that as long as this deck draws well, you should be able to win most games. So why wouldn't you just play 4 of the most consistent card in the deck? Like, this is the reason why the deck works properly, in my opinion. I'd say Jirachi in this deck is possibly better than it is in any other deck, just because you want to be switching around with Malamars, take advantage of your Psychic Recharges. You want to be getting Viridian Forest or Spell Tags and just search cards. It's never bad to be able to use Stellar Wish, whereas in other decks it's maybe only useful in the early game. Once you've set up, you don't really need to find anything. In this deck, there are always cards that you're looking for to make your board even stronger.
Yeah, exactly. You're always looking for more spell tags or different Pokemon search, maybe a supporter or 2. So Jirachi's going to be able to do the job for you. You're obviously not going to be playing all 4 down, but it just helps add consistency for your Pokemon communication as well. The fact that you've got 18 Pokemon in the list means that you're probably going to be able to use them pretty regularly. When it comes to other Pokemon to support, we also have 1 copy of Mew. This is kind of sitting on both sides of the table. You can use it to support to help stop decks like Pikarom taking knockouts on the bench by using Bench Barrier, its ability. And you can also use it to threaten some knockouts or spread some more damage around the board by using its attack Psi Power. Having a Mew with 1 energy on it and a spell tag is actually very threatening against lots of decks. You wouldn't think about it, but it's very frightening.
It sure is. I'd say that Mew is probably the most important attacker in this deck behind Giratina in some matchups, specifically in the mirror match where you want to try and get around Spell Tag as much as possible, and taking a knockout with Psi Power does allow you to get around Spell Tag, so you're going to want to be using Mew quite a bit in the mirror match, but you can also use it alongside Spell Tag, as you said. Basically allows you to put 7 damage counts on your opponent's Pokemon any way you like, and a very popular card we were just talking about, Jirachi, only has 70 HP, and that's very often going to be offensive to your opponent that you can kind of just knock out of nowhere for a cheeky prize with a Mew.
Yeah, if things aren't going well for you, you can just kind of snipe onto the bench, get yourself set up for a couple of prizes, or even just knock out a Jirachi. We also have one copy of Mimikyu with Copycat because of the promo printing of this card. We are able to use it, despite the fact that it's from Guardians Rising. Copycat's really, really good to copy some of those big attacks that those Tag Team GXs use. There's nothing more satisfying than using my 70 HP Mimikyu to do 230 damage to a Reshiram Charizard by copying its attack. It's very, very strong. And because it's a basic Psychic Pokemon, we can put the spell tag on this one as well.
It's pretty strong. When Mimikyu was one of the cards we were originally considering, we kind of ended up cutting it because we were like, this doesn't really do much against Pikarom using Full Blitz. It doesn't do quite enough damage against Reshiram Charizard, so we didn't really play around with it too much at the beginning of the format. But now that the meta's kind of evolved a bit, we have quite a lot of really strong uses for Mimikyu. You already mentioned that the Reshizard with a spell tag will allow you to copy Flash Strike to do 270 damage, which is really strong in that matchup. Against Pikarom lists that are starting to go more towards the Raichu route, you can use Copycat to copy Tandem Shock and paralyze them and take a half hit for 160, which is really, really powerful. And then even against some niche decks like Shedinja, where you can copy Resource Management, or Dark Box, where you can copy Black Lance to snipe the bench. It's got a lot of uses. I'd say there's almost, besides maybe the Mirror Match, where even in the Mirror Match you can copy Mew Psypower, there's a use for this card, I'd say, in almost every matchup in the game right now.
Yeah, there certainly is. Like, you can use it against Gardevoir to copy their attack for 150 half hit and then move your energy onto something like Espeon Deoxys, ready to take knockouts. Mimikyu always has a use. There's probably a case to be made to play multiple of them, but one is definitely good enough here. Now, I was talking about Espeon Deoxys, and this is the card that helps you kind of finish off matches. This is usually going to be the card you play down, you attach a bunch of energy to, and then you use Cross Division GX to put 10 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way you like. Most of the time you're going to be able to set up a few knockouts throughout the game with Distortion Door and Spell Tag damage, so Cross Division for 10 damage counters is going to do the job. But in other games, maybe your opponent is out of custom catches, maybe they've run out of ways to do 260 damage. You can just stack on 6 energy to this Espeon Deoxys over a couple of turns and threaten 200 damage wherever you want them to go in order to win the game. So it can be incredibly strong.
Yeah, this card is very often going to be your win condition against a lot of decks. Obviously, one of the things that this deck is lacking is a Gust effect, so Espeon Deoxys is the best way to kind of get around that effect and apply pressure to the bench where you usually would struggle to get knockouts. And especially in mirror matches where you really don't want to be attacking until you win the game, Espeon Deoxys with that 6 energy cross divide is going to allow you to take 3 to 4 prizes all at once. So even though you are weak to Giratina, hopefully you're going to be able to win the game before they get a chance to attack into you.
Yeah, and Psychic Club can even be a useful attack as well. Since we're going to have lots of Psychic Pokemon on the bench, you might be able to get to around 130 or maybe even 160 damage with this particular attack. And like I was saying before, if you're able to get yourself into a situation where your opponent can't do 260 and can't Gust, then maybe a Psychic Club for 2 turns in a row might do the job to win you the game. So that's a potential option. And our final Pokemon that we're going to be using to attack is Espurr with Ear Kinesis for a Psychic and double colorless. It does 20 damage to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon for each damage counter on that Pokemon. So maybe a half hit something with a Giratina, or you put a bunch of spell tag damage onto a Pokemon on the bench. You can Ear Kinesis, do twice that amount of damage to that Pokemon, and take a knockout when your opponent might not be expecting it.
Yeah, Ear Kinesis is effectively the non-GX version of Espeon Deoxys tag team, where you can stagger your spell tag. Say, for example, you get 2 spell tags off, you can snipe 80 damage to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon, and then all of a sudden, Ear Kinesis can do 160. 160 plus the 80 damage that was already on it is 240. That's enough to knock out some tag team Pokemon. So it's just like Espeon Deoxys. This is a really good card for trying to close out games when your opponent keeps retreating around and trying to take advantage of the fact that this deck doesn't take 1-hit KOs. This is going to be one of the best ways for you to close out your last few prize cards.
Yeah, and the best thing about it, in my opinion, is that sometimes it can bait out your opponent to play down their Mew in order to stop the Ear Kinesis, which means it's going to be that much easier for you to take multiple prizes with Espeon Deoxys, because 60 HP is easy to do, and 130 is not. So Esper might force your opponent to save one of their Pokemon this turn, only for them to be both knocked out next turn by Espeon Deoxys.
It's certainly a pretty dirty combo.
Yeah, it's pretty strong. So that's our Pokemon line. On day 1 of Worlds, when I was playing this list, I didn't play the Esper. Instead, I played Lunala Prism, which was super strong as well. They're obviously doing different things, but I ended up switching into the Esper on the second day when I was playing in the Open. And Jordan, this is the Pokemon line that you ran with. Would you make any changes to it, or do you reckon this is the perfect 18 Pokemon?
I think it's the perfect 18 Pokemon. The only debate, obviously, being is whether you want to play that 19th Pokemon, put the Lunala Prism in. I definitely think the Lunala is really strong, and I'm a huge fan of it in this deck. And I only cut it because I had to fit some other cards in. But if you were able to fit both Esper and Lunala Prism, then that's really strong. But you don't want to be clogging up with too many different tech attackers. You're only able to use 1 or 2 a game, so I'd say this is probably the correct Pokemon count for the most part.
Yeah, and the other thing that we need to remember as well is that if we put in more tech attackers, then we've got more bad starts. Like we said, we want to have the Jirachi in the active turn 1, and if we put in more basic tech attackers, then the Jirachi is less likely to start. But hey, there's arguments for all of them. We'll run through the trainers now. We've got a very simple support line. We've got 4 copies of Lily and 4 copies of Cynthia. The idea of this list is we want it to be as consistent as possible, so using those 2 supporters is probably the best way to go. There's an argument that maybe Erica might be good, but ultimately the shuffle draw from Cynthia and the consistent draw to 6 from Lily is as good as we really need.
Yeah, there's an argument for both Erica and potentially even Judge if you're trying to make space, but Lily and Cynthia are definitely the 2 best supporters, both probably in the game and for the specific deck, so just playing 4 of each of those does make it a little iffy, as to you might run out of supporters or you might miss them every now and again, but most of the time it should be fine as long as you got your Jirachis going, and 8 is enough to win the game most of the time.
Yeah, that's the key, is with Jirachi you're going to be looking at like 11 cards every turn, so you're going to be able to see you're going to see your supporters pretty regularly. On your Cynthia, if you miss one, you can Jirachi to try and find one for next turn. The other cards that we might be looking for off of Jirachi are our 4 copies of Mysterious Treasure and 4 copies of Pokemon Communication. We need to run a really high Pokemon search count so that we can find Inkays in the early game. The bit where this deck falls down is when we're not able to set up Malamars by turn 2 or 3. Once that's happened, the deck works brilliantly. It's really easy to find your attackers, it's really easy to set up your damage with Spell Tag, but it's in the first few turns that it starts to collapse. We need to make sure that we've got Pokemon Communication and Mysterious Treasure at max counts so that we don't miss out on any of the Pokemon we need to set up early doors.
Those cards are both 100% 4-off counts, and I honestly feel like 4 of each of those doesn't even feel like it's enough a lot of the time. I wish there was a third Pokemon Search card that we could play like old Malamar used to play Ultra Ball, Mysterious Treasure, and Nest Ball. Without access to Nest Ball as that third Pokemon Search card, does feel a little lacking because Cherish Ball doesn't quite do anything really in this deck. We're only playing 1 GX Pokemon, and you don't really need to use that unless you want to communication it away early. So it's definitely the strongest Pokemon Search line we can run with in the deck at the moment. But if you ever think of a Pokemon Search card as well as these 2 you can fit in, then I wouldn't be against that at all.
Yeah, there's definitely the argument that you probably need a little bit more, but for the moment these are going to be the 2 that do the job the best for us. We're also playing 2 copies of the new Reset Stamp. Like you said before, when we were talking about supporters, you might choose instead to play like a 1 Stamp, 1 Judge combination. That was something that I was testing out for a bit, but ultimately Stamp is so strong that playing 2 of them is probably not a bad idea.
Stamp is such a powerful card. Compared to Judge, it's just got so much more power. Obviously, it doesn't increase your consistency at all, but Reset Stamp specifically in this deck is really important, especially when you're playing that Espeon Deoxys. A lot of the time, you're going to want to play Reset Stamp in the late game on the same turn that you go into Espeon Deoxys, because obviously with 260 HP, that's going to be the hardest hurdle for your opponent to come over, so you want to give them the least amount of resources possible on that turn to deal with the Espeon Deoxys, and hopefully the Reset Stamp will give you the time you need to either set up for a Cross Divide GX for this single effect, or maybe even get the 6 Angie for the double effect.
Yeah, we should be able to kind of hold our opponent off for a little bit, and 2 means that if 1 is prized, we're going to be able to do it if it happens early. We're also playing a pretty thick Switch line. We've got 4 copies of Switch and 2 copies of a skateboard. Obviously, we need to make sure that our attackers are on the bench in order to use Psychic Recharge. So if we don't have a Jirachi with an escape board in the active, then Switch is probably going to be the card that we are hunting down. And Jordan, I know that in our testing before the tournament, this card was actually the card that we were looking for the most in the late game to try and win. So find that Switch to get into whatever attacker we need to take the big knockout.
It certainly was, and especially since some of the Pikachu Zekrom decks that we saw at the tournament were playing Cyrus Prism Star as a tech for this matchup. You always need to be holding a Switch on the turn they play that Cyrus Prism Star, because in theory they're going to play Cyrus, you're going to have nothing but 2 Malamars on your bench, and then they're going to knock out your active Pokemon and strand a Malamar active, so if you don't find Switch on that turn, the game can very easily just be over. So you definitely want to have Switch in that turn, but just in general, Switch is always a good card to hold on to, because one of the cards we were considering playing before we settled on this list is we're playing a decent count of Acrobike, either 3 or 4 Acrobike, and we figured that playing 4 Switch was probably more important than playing Acrobikes, because every time you play a Switch, it effectively allows you to use an additional Stellar Wish, and a Stellar Wish, in theory, seems like a more useful effect than Acrobike anyway, so Switch almost acts just as a better Acrobike in this list, as weird as that sounds.
Yeah, it's kind of an awkward idea to wrap your head around, but Switch is very, very important, and didn't find myself in a position where I was ever wanting for one. The only bad thing about playing 4 Switch is that sometimes you can find multiple in the same hand, and they can kind of clog yourself up a bit, but that's okay. I'd rather have too many than not enough. When it comes to our stadium line, traditionally Viridian Forest is the stadium of choice for Malamar. In our list, we chose to just go with the 2 Viridian Forest. The reason for that is, 1, lots of people are already playing Viridian Forest anyway, so we're going to be able to make use of theirs, but also we wanted to fit in 2 copies of Power Plant. Now, we weren't necessarily thinking that Mewtwo Mew was going to be a massive deck, but this card pretty much solidifies your matchup. If you're able to hit for weakness into a Mewtwo Mew with a Giratina, then it's going to be much easier for you to swing that matchup in your favour than if you have to 2-hit them. So Power Plant really, really strong there, and it also hinders Pikarom a lot more than you'd expect it to, mainly because they don't run a huge amount of switches themselves. They're relying on Zeraora's ability, and they can't use the Dedenne, which they would use to set themselves up in the early game with a Power Plant in play. So Power Plant serves kind of dual purpose in that matchup.
It's certainly really, really strong, and I would say that this card in this deck is the main reason why I would consider Malamar to be one of the top contenders moving forward still, even though it didn't have heaps of success at Worlds. After Henry won Worlds with Mewtwo and Mew, I think a lot of people are going to be expecting that to be one of the top decks in tournaments going forward, and Power Plant in Malamar is just probably I'd say it's the hardest single counter to playing that deck, besides playing like a Keldeo and hoping they don't have an answer for it. If you play Giratina, Malamar, and Power Plant, you're going to have such a easy time in that matchup as long as you're able to find the cards. And as you mentioned, it's not just good against Mewtwo and Mew, that's just the matchup it's best in. It's also really strong in Pikarom, and even some more niche matchups like Dark Box, where you can shut off their Weavile. That's actually a pretty tough matchup if they're able to draw pretty well. And you can use this Power Plant to just make things a little bit harder for them, and it could be the turning point in that matchup.
Yeah, the Power Plant super, super strong, especially in the late game, because there are lots of decks that just want to use one ability. Maybe they're trying to promote a Heatran to take a knockout or whatever it is. Power Plant can turn those abilities off and really help you out. Finally, we've got 4 copies of the named spell tag. This is the thing that makes this deck so frightening. The fact that Giratina can do 130 damage a turn in itself is scary, but when you can advance that to 170 with a spell tag, it means that you're able to take knockouts on lots of Pokemon very quickly. It means that you're able to set up knockouts with Espeon Deoxys really quickly, and it means that you're putting your opponent under a lot of pressure to make a decision about whether it's worth taking a knockout this turn or not. Maybe they dig a little bit harder to try and find a Gust, and they remove some of the resources that they need to win the game, just to try and avoid this spell tag damage. Very, very important card, the thing that makes the deck so powerful.
I would say that this single card is what makes this deck the difference between being an almost autopilot deck to being one of the most skill-based decks in the format. Being able to use these spell tags in the most beneficial way to you possible is very difficult to do because it forces you to map out your prizes and figure out exactly where you need your damage to go super early in the game. If you screw it up, then it can very easily be the difference between winning and losing the game. And I know I lost a couple of games at Worlds just because I misplaced my spell tag damage once or twice in the early game and got punished for it because people at Worlds are pretty good and figure out how to punish you for small mistakes. So the spell tag's definitely a super important card in this deck to know how to use it. So if you're going to play this deck, definitely start practicing all of your matchups and figure out where you think the spell tag's going to be most useful in each scenario. One of the things we were considering cutting one of the spell tags for an adventure bag, and I really like that as well. You're not always going to use 4 spell tag each game, so having that adventure bag is going to make your deck a little bit more consistent and potentially find spell tags earlier than usually would be able to with 4, as weird as that sounds. But the 4 spell tag is probably the safer way to go, just in case you prize some or you run out. You never want to be in a case where you're just 1 spell tag away from winning the game.
Yeah, and usually this is the card that you're looking for like the turn before you need the switch. Like I was saying, the last turn of the game you need the switch. The spell tag is the one that you need the turns like 2 and 3 before the end of the game, because you want to make sure that if your opponent is taking a knockout, that they're doing so at a cost to themselves. You want to make sure that you've got your spell tag damage going onto the field to really push your win condition forward. Finally, we have 10 copies of basic Psychic Energy. This count shuffled quite a lot between I think we were like 9, and I had a Recycle Energy in for the Open. We had some lower counts, like down to 9. I can't remember whether we tested 8 as well, but 9 was definitely a point where we were settled on 9. But the 10 energy just means that you're that much more likely to draw one in your opening couple of hands. Just to get an early attachment to a Giratina or an early discard with a Treasure or a Viridian. You want to make sure that you've got at least 2 Psychic Energy in the bin in the first couple of turns. So extra Psychic Energy in the deck means you're more likely to get that into the discard pile, which means you're more likely to be able to attack. So that's the logic behind having that increased count of Psychic Energy.
I would say that the 10th Psychic Energy is probably the most luxury card in this deck. It's not in any way necessary, and for most of our testing, we were only playing 9 energy total. Adding the 10th was really just us trying to make this list as consistent as possible. Obviously, going into Worlds, consistency is the most important thing, and honestly, most of the games that we ended up losing with Malamar, when we looked back and we're like, why did we lose? We're like, oh, we missed an energy turn 2, or we missed an attack off the second turn because we weren't able to discard enough energy. It was just every game that we felt like we got destroyed is because we were missing energy at the wrong time. So having that 10th energy, while not necessary if you do want to add a card to this deck or play around with accounts, I would definitely look at playing the 10th energy before most of the other cards in this list. But at the World Championship specifically, we figured the 10th energy was the best way to go.
Yeah, exactly. You could cut it out for things like Adventure Bag or Lunala Prism, maybe an extra supporter if you wanted it. I know that I tested with 1 Erica on top of those 4/4 Lily Cynthia lines as well. There's lots of ways you can go with it, but the energy was, like you said, the reason we were losing games, so we figured we'd go with it. Let's jump on the ladder, Jordan. We'll see whether we can get a couple of good games with this particular list, and hopefully the fact that you and I both have practiced this deck a lot means that we're actually going to get a couple of good games out of it.
I'd like to think so. It looks like we're potentially versing a mirror match, which is a very skill-based matchup depending on what cards our opponent is running, so hopefully we'll be able to show off some of the cool plays that we can make with this deck.
Yeah, we'll see how we go. No basics in that opening hand, which is probably a good thing because it doesn't look amazing.
It's okay. It's like 1 or 2 cards away from being perfect. I would enjoy that hand if it was holding a Jirachi, for example, but this hand looks a little better.
This
hand
clunky,
looks, but it could be worse.
It's okay. If we top deck a Pokemon or a Mysterious Treasure here, we'll be feeling real good.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that can make this hand really good, but worst case scenario, we can always just Cynthia the hand away if we're not thinking it's not going to be strong enough.
That's not ideal. I think we're just going to play Cynthia here.
Or I guess the other thing is maybe Stellar Wish into a Mysterious Treasure makes this hand really strong. We could take that risk.
Do you want to gamble?
Yeah, I mean, they've opened Giratina, which is a pretty poor opener for them.
Yeah,
so
let's gamble.
You can maybe take the risk.
Oh, it was bad. It was bad.
No luck there.
Let's just grab a Cynthia.
Just pretending that we didn't have a draw supporter in our hand and we were bailed out there.
Yeah, we just got out of it. Whew, that was close.
Alright,
But this
hopefully we
is
get a little bit of a better hand this time. This one looks much better.
So I think what we're going to do here is we're just going to get rid of this Mew with Pokecom. And we're going to grab ourselves some Inkays. We've got a Malamar prize. There doesn't look like there's a huge amount of cards missing as such. And also, as much as I don't really want to do it, we've got to make a choice between Spell Tag and Switch here as to which card we want to get rid of for a second Inkay. And I feel like it's going to be Switch.
Yeah, Switch isn't going to be useful in the next couple turns since we do have Jirachi in the active, and due to the fact we missed an energy attachment this turn, we're not going to be able to get a very easy turn to attack off next turn. It's possible, but I would think that we're probably going to have to settle for a turn 3 attack, but that's fine because we are going first, so we're still not going to be too far behind.
Yeah, and our opponent did open with the Giratina here, so we should be alright. They're looking like they've got a little bit of a better discard going here. Mysterious Treasure away, a Psychic for another Inkay. Best case scenario for us, our opponent doesn't get like an attachment onto the active or can't switch into a Jirachi. We'll wait and see. Erica's for 3.
The turn 1 Erica, if we had a better start, then they would have potentially had a better start as well, but luckily for us, kind of almost getting rewarded for
having a poor start. And it looks like they're playing the Acro Bikes in there as well. Some of the cards we were talking about that might be worth including. But it doesn't seem to have helped them that much here. Just going to attach the Spell Tag to the active and move on with their lives.
Definitely a lot of cards that are going to be fairly similar between our decks. That Necrozma is not one of them. That's actually another card that we were kind of looking at here and there in our testing, but it didn't really add enough to the deck to be worth playing, in my opinion, but it's definitely a really strong card, especially if you're expecting a lot of people to play Hooper to try and counteract these Malamar decks. The Necrozma is able to just one-hit KO a Hooper and isn't weak to it as well.
Yeah, so that's pretty strong. We're just going to move along here. We've got
Seems like a decent enough start.
We've got some stuff here. I feel like we're just going to chuck this Malamar down because that's definitely going in play. I'm also going to discard the Psychic Energy, I think.
Yep.
To grab a Giratina or a Malamar. Probably the Tina, I think. Let me just...
I would agree with that.
Let me just check and see what we've used. We haven't really used anything. We'll grab the Tina.
And if we're lucky, we could even find a Mysterious Treasure of Stellar Wish if you haven't used Stellar Wish yet. I don't think you have.
I don't think we have, so we'll use it and see what happens. We could grab the Switch here and go for a second Jirachi. Or, we've got a Cynthia in hand, so we've got a supporter for next turn, so I reckon that's probably what we'll do.
Which seems like the strongest card. We could either switch right now and Stellar Wish again, or we could just hold the Switch and potentially use it next turn. I think both plays are fine.
I'm going to go into the Jirachi. I'm a greedy boy. I want that
Go
Mysterious Treasure.
For it.
I want the treasure. Well, I got a Viridian. That's okay. That's okay.
I wouldn't put it down right now. I'd probably either hold it or maybe put the Power Plant down instead, because we're not going to be able to get used to the Viridian this turn, so we don't want to give it to our opponent.
Yeah, so we'll just sit here like this, and that's probably going to be it. We could potentially put the Tina down now and Psychic Recharge to it, but it's probably easier just to wait.
We're holding the Viridian Forest now, so we can discard it with discard the Giratina with Viridian Forest next turn, start getting some energies into our hand. If they put the Viridian Forest down, then that's not really that big a deal. I think we're looking decent here. They're actually playing a second Erica turn 1 and 2, and this is kind of the reason why we opted not to go for Erica. It's definitely a very powerful supporter in this deck, but it doesn't really do as much as Lily and Cynthia do in the beginning of the game.
Yeah, it's not the most useful, having drawn 7 cards there, especially if those 7 cards aren't amazing, and it looks like they're not super great. Well, they do have Switch, so they're going to be able to go into Jirachi here, so maybe things aren't so bad, but there's only one Psychic in the bin for them, so we'll have to wait and see whether they're able to get double Malamar and all that stuff.
The Switch was definitely the most important card our opponent could have found on this turn. They really needed to get that before we started attacking, otherwise they were going to be falling way too far behind if they weren't able to find Switch in the early game. This not only gets the Giratina on the bench ready to start charging it up, but more importantly gets the Jirachi into the active so they can start finding some more cards.
And the fact that they've promoted the Jirachi here means that we could potentially get an attack off here without hitting into a Spell Tag. We're going to need to get a little bit lucky, but we could do it. It's possible.
It's certainly not that hard. Like, we if we decide to not use Viridian to discard the Giratina and instead use it to discard a Psychic Energy, then all we really need is a second Malamar and a way to get out the active.
Yeah, so we could be in a good spot here, and our opponent now has the 2 energy in the discard, so they're going to be able to attach with Psychic Recharge twice. The question is, do they have another switch mechanic?
Yeah, they're actually really close to getting off the turn to attack it, which would be pretty impressive considering they powered up the... they opened the Giratina, and they're looking like they're going to prioritize going with Special Laser Necrozma, which does actually knock out a Jirachi even if they don't have a special energy.
Do they have the energy? They
might
don't.
just
They
be going for barrier attack.
Barrier attack, okay.
That doesn't really make a difference because it is weak to Psychic, so Giratina is going to be able to take the knockout regardless, even if they are able to reduce our damage by 30.
It will.
Yeah, I think we're just
going to
try and get
for it.
a Giratina attack here.
I think that's
It's not too hard.
probably the strongest play. We'll see whether it happens.
We've got almost all the cards we need.
Almost everything. We need to find
the third turn in a row, we need to find a mysterious treasure off of a Jirachi. But we get 2 Cell Wishes to do so.
Let's have a look at these cards. We'll get rid of the energy out of deck now. And then Stellar Wish. And there's the mysterious treasure. Perfect.
Just like that. Easy. And we even got rewarded with Spell Tag in our hand, which was definitely a card we wanted to find on this turn. Fortunately, we are going to be hitting into a Spell Tag on their side of the board, which is a little awkward, but not the end of the world.
No, it should be okay. Their 4 damage placement is not going to affect us too much. There's an argument that could be made for going into the second Jirachi here, but I think we just hold the switch and give ourselves the knockout. Because then, that way, if they don't knock us out, we can switch into the Jirachi next turn to try and find a supporter.
Yes, I agree. And what's actually really nice here is that even though we are hitting into a Spell Tag, we're not hitting into a Giratina, which is pretty important because it means they're not going to be able to get off an additional Distortion Door, which is pretty important in this matchup. Obviously, neither of us were able to use Distortion Door yet. We were both forced to bench our Giratina, or in that case, open with Giratina. But yeah, they're going to probably struggle to get Distortion Door off now that we didn't knock out their Giratina.
That is true, and I'll just wait for them to place their Spell Tag damage here. Obviously, the 2 Jirachi on our bench is a bit of a liability at the moment. If they are playing a Ultra Necrozma, which some people were, then they'll be able to spread that damage out in order to give themselves a couple of prizes off of Sky Scorch, but instead choosing just to put all of the damage onto the Jirachi means that they can threaten the knockout on that with D-Doors as well as extra Spell Tag damage if they get it off.
Yeah, so now this is where the matchup's going to start getting interesting. So we both have a Giratina with a Spell Tag attached, so neither of us really want to attack into the opposing Giratina because it doesn't really pay off as well as you think. You take a prize card, your opponent gets to place 60 damage on the board, which in theory can potentially set up multiple prize cards with Espeon Deoxys in the late game, so you have to be really careful here and try and hope that our opponent attacks into us multiple times and doesn't try and go around our Giratina, because that's where the matchup gets really awkward.
Yes, so we could potentially, like if they take a knockout into our Giratina, we could potentially go into something like Mew in order to try and set up more damage counters. Maybe we could put some damage on the Malamars on the bench and use something like Esper to take a knockout if we want, or if we're super brave, we can just smack into it again with Giratina, knowing that we got the first Spell Tag damage off. Wait and see what our opponent
what's
does
also important in this matchup is when you're attacking with Shadow Impact every turn, you are slowly putting 40 damage on your own board. So if you don't knock out the Giratina, that 40 damage will stick and eventually be able to be utilized by potential Spell Tags or Espeon Deoxys. So it looks like they are going to be going into that Giratina. And I think that's going to give us a lot of room to outplay our opponent here. If we can find Mew, we can use that Spell Tag, maybe knock out their Inkay or their Jirachi this turn, and have the Spell Tag to put even more pressure on them.
Yeah, so the question is, where do we want to place this damage? I feel like the Jirachi is probably the safest place to stick it, because they're not going to be able to evolve that Jirachi at any point. And like you said, we can get the Mew to take the knockout if we want.
I like that idea. We could definitely put either all 4 of it on Jirachi, or maybe we could put one on the Inkay if we want to use Distortion Door, but I think putting all 4 on Jirachi seems like a safe bet.
Yeah, it does. It means that if we do want a D-Door, we can just place the 10 damage elsewhere with the Mew. Obviously, we're talking about this play as if it's already happened. We actually need to find it. Oh, there it is.
What do you know?
Huh.
How convenient is that?
Huh. Cool. Well, that makes this turn a lot easier. I was about to go into, okay, well, we need to find this, that, and the other. No, we'll just get it off the top. Easy peasy.
So what we could do here is, since we've got a spare turn of Psychic Recharges, if we want to, we could actually go ahead and find our Espeon Deoxys with this Spoken Communication and start charging it up on the bench to potentially get off that 6 energy attack. It does take a couple turns to set up, so knowing this deck
prized.
Surprise. That's a big deal in this matchup.
Okay, so in that case, we need to have a bit of a different strategy here. My next best idea, I think, is just going in for an Inkay and attacking with a Malamar, potentially.
Yeah, I like that. Or even just holding the Inkay. We are about to take a prize if we knock out this Jirachi on the bench, so there's still the potential to unprize the Espeon Deoxys, which is a pretty big deal.
That is true. I'm going to grab this spell tag here off of the Jirachi. So what do you reckon?
Yep.
Do we bench the Inkay, or do we just go straight into the...
I think we hold it for one more turn and see what we unprize.
Yeah, fair enough. Sounds good. So we'll go into the Mew. We can probably afford to get rid of this Jirachi as well with Viridian Forest. Probably should have done that before.
No, well,
just a
it's
thinner
fine.
card, whatever. And then we will Psy Power and put 3 damage on the Jirachi.
Yeah, so this is really strong now because if our opponent just attacks into Mew again, they're going to have to place 40 more damage on their board. Hey, look,
We got
the Espeon.
We got it!
So yeah, this is a really interesting position for our opponent because I'm assuming they're probably just going to have to knock out this Mew, right? And if they do that, then they're either going to put the damage on the active, which is good for us. It means we can potentially use Espeon Deoxys later on to knock it out. Or if they put it on the bench, then we can use Esper. If we can find Esper, we can use Esper to knock out whatever Pokemon they put the damage on and leave that Giratina active with the spell tags. We really don't want to have to knock that out with an attack.
If we can avoid taking that knockout on the Giratina, then that would be great. They might choose to go into the Necrozma here in order to try and stop that damage from being relevant, but I don't know if that's necessarily the best play. You kind of want to force us to take knockouts on things that we don't want to, and if they promote the Necrozma without putting a spell tag on it, then we essentially get ourselves a free prize, so I'll be happy to take that.
Yeah, I'd say that they're definitely going to be trying to find that spell tag this turn. If they don't put a spell tag on it, we definitely just want to knock out this Necrozma, because Necrozma being an attacker, which doesn't place damage on your own board, is really important. But yeah, I wonder where they're going to put it. They're just going to keep putting it on the active. We'll get another spell tag here.
Alright, where are we going to go?
So I think it's probably best for us to try and target down one of these Pokemon that we can just knock out with Esper. So we could either put 3 on a Malamar and knock it out with Esper, or we could say put 40 damage onto the Necrozma.
What we could do is we could put 2 onto the Malamar, 2 onto the Inkay. That way, the Esper is able to take a knockout on Malamar with a Distortion Door tick. That could be worth doing. That way we guarantee some more damage. Or we can just hit into this Necrozma and knock it out. I feel like the Necrozma is probably the better play. Let's do that.
I like that. I do think that as long as we can avoid it, it's probably smartest for us to not fill our bench with Giratina until we desperately need to, because we want to leave ourselves option to bench the Espeon Deoxys. So, yeah, I would say that this is probably a good time to try and find Esper and knock out the Necrozma on the bench.
Yeah, so let's have a look here. I guess what we can do is we can thin out an energy. We don't need all of those to be in deck. We only really need 1 in hand. Let's see if we can get that Esper off of this Stellar Wish here.
Only 18 cards in deck, so it's not too unlikely for us to find a...
Easy. No problems at all.
Stuck in that Jirachi, probably not going to be wanting to bench that anytime soon. And yeah, Esper's going to be really strong here because our opponent wasn't able to find Mew on that turn to protect the bench. We're going to be able to just knock out the Necrozma with Esper.
Yeah, and the best thing,
we activate the Sorcerer Door.
Best thing here again is that we've got the spell tag again. So our opponent wants to take another knockout. They're going to have to do it onto the Esper with the spell tag. So we're in a pretty good spot here. I'm considering just playing the Cynthia, but maybe I'm just going to hold on to it.
What we could also do if we wanted to is we could just attack with Ekinesis and leave the Necrozma on 10 damage left so we can knock it out mid-turn with a Distortion Door later on, or we could just Distortion Door now and knock it out. I don't know which one's better. It's up to you.
I think we might just go for the knockout now. We'll just do that.
Seems fine. And
We'll
I'd
just
probably,
take the
chuck
prize.
10 on the EK. We're getting close to the point now where if our opponent just attacks it into this Esper next turn, we can probably use the spell tag plus Espeon Deoxys to take multiple prizes next turn, because don't forget, they've still got 80 damage on that Giratina, and they're going to have to put 40 more on themselves again.
Yeah, if they want to attack with Giratina, they have to use Shadow Impact to put their damage somewhere, and 40 damage is always good. At the moment, we're taking 2 prizes with Espeon Deoxys if they don't attack at all. But if they don't attack at all, they don't take a prize, so it doesn't matter. And with the 40 from our spell tag, we're going to be able to set up a couple of knockouts here. We'll see how we go. There's the Lunala Prism that we were talking about.
Lunala Prism is actually a really good card in this matchup sometimes as well, because it is an attacker which isn't knocked out by Shadow Impact due to the fact that it has Dark Weakness and more than 130 HP, so you can lose Lunala Prism in this matchup to kind of force your opponent to place spell tag damage on the active to knock it out, whereas usually you want to be using that spell damage like we've been doing in this game to set up knockouts on the bench. The Lunala Prism kind of forces your opponent to put that damage into the active position, so that's something we need to keep in mind. Our opponent could potentially be looking to use the Lunala Prism in one of the next few turns.
Yes, and we're just doing some maths here. Let's have a think about how much damage we need to do. We need to be able to do an extra little bit of damage because of that Malamar coming down. They're going to attack into us with Shadow Impact and put 40 presumably on the Giratina, which means it has 10 HP left. We're going to be able to put 40 damage down, so that means that we're going to be able to put that Malamar on the bench to 40 HP left. We could potentially win the game next turn. I don't think we can actually
wait and see where they put the damage. Alright, so put it on the active. So I think we actually use our spell tag to knock out the Giratina, and just get that spell tag off the board without triggering it, and then probably chuck the rest all onto one of their bench Malamars. Although they are probably going to promote the one that we put the damage on, so we could spread it if we wanted to anyway. But we've only got 2 prizes left now, so we can definitely start setting up for that Espeon Deoxys win condition very soon.
I think what we're going to do is we're going to spread that damage around, because that way if they do promote one of the Malamars with the damage, we've still got some of the ticks left. We probably could have spread them a little bit more evenly across the 3, but that's okay.
Yeah, it's not that big a deal. I think we've pretty much got this game locked up at this point anyway, because this turn we can just take a knockout with Giratina, go down to 1 prize card left, and I don't think our opponent has any way of taking 3 prizes next turn unless we bench that Espeon Deoxys and they run custom catches, which I don't think either of those things is going to happen. We might even be better off just benching the Espeon Deoxys and maybe going for a reset stamp to make sure they don't get custom catches just in case they run it. My only concern being they might use a reset stamp of their own to remove it from our hand if we don't play it down, so...
Yeah, well, let's
We've got
go
2
for
reset
it.
stamps in the deck. We could go for it, just bench the Espeon Deoxys, play Cynthia, use Stellar Wish, take a knockout, reset stamp them down to 3. I don't think they ever come back from that.
Well, here's the reset stamps, so that sounds fine to me. We'll grab ourselves a switch just in case something horrible happens. And obviously it means that our opponent does potentially have a chance to win the game because of that Espeon Deoxys if they do happen to play all of those custom catches. But the likelihood of that is pretty slim. They've got 3
I would say they
cards.
probably aren't even running that card. And this damage I think is probably smartest to go onto the Espeon Deoxys because they don't... there's not enough damage on there for them to knock it out with Esper, so... We don't want to give them a win condition with Espeon Deoxys by putting on another Pokemon.
No, we don't want something random to happen that we weren't expecting. So this is going to mean that we pretty much guaranteed ourselves the game unless something strange happens.
Yeah, if our opponent does choose to go into their own Espeon Deoxys GX attack this turn, they do have access to knocking out both Jirachis and taking 2 prize cards. But 2 prize cards isn't 3 prize cards, and
That's the amount they need to take.
Next turn.
Yeah, so we've got all the things we need. They did get the Erica off of there, but alas, that was not enough. And we take that game. We've been going for 45 minutes, so we won't bore you with another game with Mally Tags. It's one of the problems that the deck had on day 1 for me, was that my first 3 games were all ties, because the deck takes so long to win or lose. So that's definitely something to consider if you do choose this particular deck going into a tournament. You're going to need to be able to play fast or guarantee that your opponent is going to lose in the first instance. Pardon me. So yeah, definitely worth thinking about if you're choosing the deck. But hey, it just goes to show that if you can outthink your opponent, you can definitely win, especially in the mirror. Deck's good enough to do pretty much anything.
Yeah, we were able to show off a lot of the cool tricks that the deck's able to pull off. In fact, we were able to take full use of pretty much all of our tech-attacking Pokemon except for Mimikyu in that matchup. And if our opponent had gone into a Mew of their own, then we would have been using Mimikyu instead of Esper in that game. So definitely a pretty good list for the mirror match. And just in general, I think it draws really consistently most of the time. Obviously, you're going to get bad draws here and there, but this is definitely one of the best decks going forward, especially if you're expecting the Perfection Mewtwo deck to increase in popularity.
Yeah, it's super, super strong. Definitely worth testing, because if you're not playing it, you're going to be playing against it, because people are going to want to use it. Super, super good deck, and it's just a shame that it didn't see as much success as we would have liked at World Championships. But hey, there's always next tournament. Thanks, Jordan, for coming along and playing this one with me.
No problem.
And thanks everyone for watching. If you like the content, then consider subscribing by clicking the Sableye in the middle of the screen right now. On the left-hand side, we have some videos that YouTube thinks that you'll like, and on the right, we have our Unified Minds deck profile and matchup playlist, as we are right in the thick of preparing for our next tournament coming up in Melbourne in a week and a half's time. It's pretty exciting, Jordan.
Sure is.
Sure is. We'll catch you all next time for more from the Sableyes. Bye.